This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. It is a Tuesday, 7th of May to be exact, and my guest is Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com. Eric, how are you this fine spring day?
Well, I'm trying to cut off my ankle bracelet for committing the offense of anti-Semitism.
Oh, did you question something the Israeli government did?
There you go.
For shame.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You know, we're making light of it, but it's actually a very serious topic.
Yeah, what exactly was Congress hoping to accomplish with this Anti-Semitism Awareness Act that they passed last week?
Well, obviously, I think to enhance their own power, but it's also an example of their poltroonery, especially with regards to anything having to do with criticizing the government of Israel. And I think it's really important to state it that way, because what they're trying to do is make that synonymous with hatred of people who happen to be Jewish, which of course is preposterous. But they're working very hard to make it essentially the same thing. So if you raise your hand and say, well, you know, maybe it's not such a good thing to just indiscriminately slaughter tens of thousands of people who happen to be in the way, somehow that constitutes an attack on Jewish people.
No, it's a good point. I was reading a commentary from Michael Herman today, and there were two things that really jumped out at me. One was he talked about the ratio of the number of people killed by Hamas versus the number of people killed by Israel since that time. Let's see. Here are the numbers. 1,139 Israelis have died from October 7th on, with 34,178 Palestinian deaths and over 78,000 wounded. That's a 34-to-1 ratio and a 110-to-1 ratio of dead and wounded. Holy smokes.
Yeah, whatever happened to the old doctrine of two wrongs don't make a right, and more broadly, to just indiscriminate slaughter. That, you know, what was it the papal legate said? Kill them all, let God sort them out.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what we're supposed to countenance now with our tax dollars. You know, it's bad enough that the government of Israel is doing this, but it is doing it with our connivance and our financial support.
And something else that Michael Herman pointed out that I don't often hear, and I guess it's because people have this visceral reaction. You're either with Hamas or you're with Israel. But he said there is no innocence here. And he says, I have to repeat that because one side clearly claims to be innocent, but there is no innocence. There's just rage, hate, and destruction.
Correct, exactly. You know, I'm not by no means a supporter of Hamas, you know, as they try to frame it. You know, just like they try to frame anybody who questions affirmative action as somehow being a supporter of the Ku Klux Klan. It's insane.
Yep, and it's totally possible to condemn those who are promoting the rage and murder and destruction, while at the same time having great sympathy for all the innocent people on any side who happen to be caught in the middle of this.
Absolutely. Whatever happened to just being opposed to indiscriminate slaughter, cruelty, and mindless violence? You know, that's my position on this. I'm for team humanity. I'm not for any particular branch of faction.
And this is why we are friends, because it's so rare to find that rational take. And I honestly, my opinion is you will find the more rational take, the more you find people who have stepped away from getting their information from either mainstream or mass media sources and who are doing more of their own digging to find out what's what.
Yeah, and also people who've just kind of stepped away from the conditioning. We really do live in a kind of vivified version of what Orwell wrote about in 1984, where, you know, the masses have been conditioned to react like animals to what they're told. You know, so if the party orator barks Goldstein, if it barks you're at war with Eurasia, you know, the masses just mindlessly screech their hate. That's where we're at now. You know, people don't just think about things, reflect on them, and take into consideration what they're told and decide for themselves whether this is reasonable or rational, let alone whether it's crazy.
Well, I went to visit my dear old gray-haired mama yesterday, and I walked in just as the CBS Evening News was starting, and it's exactly like you're describing, Eric. It's conditioning. And her first comment was, oh, they're doing more stories about Trump. And I thought, yep, conditioning you to fear the orange man. Oh, brought to you by Pfizer. Should mention that.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, speaking of that, I know we're shifting gears here a little bit, but Bourla, the head of Pfizer, came out the other day and talked about how much money they're planning to make selling vaccines for cancer. How convenient, you know, the cancers are spiking apparently because what appears to be a correlation with the COVID vaccines, and now they're going to try to cash in on that.
Yeah, and the whole time underneath all of this, while we're looking at the shiny distractions, that push towards we have to stop misinformation, we have to stop anti-Semitism. It's a push towards controlling speech and controlling thought, and I wonder how many people really recognize just how relentless that's going on.
Yeah, and it's so insidious. I remember, you probably do too, way, way, way back, and this is like when I was in high school and college in the 80s, when I learned that in Germany it's illegal to question any dogma whatsoever pertaining to the Holocaust. And this is not denying the Holocaust, but for example, if you say, well, maybe it wasn't exactly 6 million people that were exterminated, maybe it was 5.5. That actually is a criminal act in Germany. You can't question the dogma that's presented to you. And I thought to myself, what they're trying to do is maneuver this. Most people obviously don't like Nazis, and in no way do they approve of the Holocaust and what happened to Jews in World War II. But they're using that sympathy to manipulate people and get them to accept thought control, to criminalize questioning not just of that particular thing or any aspect of it, but of potentially anything. And that's where we're headed right now.
Hear, hear. So let's take a moment here and let's talk solutions. A person who doesn't want to be conditioned into, reflexively supporting the next big thing or whatever. What are some of the steps we should be taking as individuals to fortify ourselves against these attacks on our minds?
Actually, I think one of the things that we can do was well elaborated in the children's story about the emperor having no clothes. And it took a child to point it out. And the moral of the story was most people saw that the emperor was naked, that his new clothes were nothing, and it was all a big ripoff and a con. But most people, being social herd animals, are afraid to be the ones to step forward and say, he's naked. He doesn't have any clothes. And it was the same during the pandemic when most people put on the stupid facial underwear, not because they believed it was going to keep them safe, but because they didn't want to stand out. It takes a little bit of guts to stand out. And the same applies here to say, wait a minute, I don't think it's a good thing, a proper thing, a justifiable thing to indiscriminately kill tens of thousands of people in what appears to be an endless slaughter because of an act that happened on account of a few people, back in October. You just have to be willing to take a stand and not be one of these people who moves along with the herd.
Hear, hear. Now, I'm just curious, are you starting to hear some of the rumblings percolating up about bird flu and the next big fear?
Yes.
What's your take?
Actually, and I'm quite concerned about that, probably for the same reason that you are, in that you and I both have birds. And, it's not too much of a stretch, given the times that we live in, to believe that, among other things, one of the agendas here is to make it unlawful for people like you and I to maintain our own birds, because they don't want us to have any kind of control over our own food supply.
Yep. It's and it sounds like the World Health Organization is on the cusp of trying to implement some kind of intranational protocol, basically binding all nations to what we say is what goes if we say there's a pandemic. And that sounds pretty fishy to me as well.
Well, sure. And, I summon my best Seinfeld. Who are these people? Who is the WHO? Who voted for them? How is it that the WHO somehow has any control at all over what goes on here in the United States? Well, the answer to that is our politicians somehow are under the control of the WHO. And the congressional prohibition on such things apparently is null and void. It used to be that the Congress had to approve of a treaty that would bind the U.S. to some international agreement. Now, apparently, all it takes is to take the withered hand of that old greasy pedophile grifter and sign some kind of a document, and we're all bound to it.
So true. And if anybody was paying the least bit of attention over the last 4 years, you should understand that they used it as a power grab before. The same people still they're within reach of those levers of power. They would do it again in a heartbeat. No
question. Right, exactly. That's a really, really important take-home point. To understand that when you are dealing with the kinds of people who did what they did during the so-called pandemic and who have not been held to account, let alone put in prison where a lot of them belong, of course they're going to do it again. Why wouldn't they?
Yep. And the only thing that really stands in their way is people who have woke up. I'm sorry to use that word woke, but those of us who recognize what happened, and I've heard you say this many times, and that is, I'm not going to comply. My mind's already made up. I will not comply because they've already destroyed their credibility. End of story.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the foundational point. Once you really, come to grips with that horrible knowledge that these people are evil, frankly, I'm not going to mince words. When you realize that, then everything else becomes clear about what you have to do.
Exactly. And for people who but people might call me names, or I might be ostracized, or maybe someone will cancel me. That's a small price to pay for taking that boot off the back of your neck. But you don't realize it until you do it.
No question. And far better to be called names than to be put in a prison or be put before a ditch with a bayonet in your back.
Hear, hear. By the way, was that one of your barnyard fowl crowing in the background I just heard?
Yeah, you heard him? Yeah.
I did. Well,
Dawn calls him the Black Knight, I think, right? The Dark Knight? The Dark Knight, yeah.
Let's talk about this in the next segment. We're coming up on our break here.
Okay.
Eric Peters is my guest. I really did want to talk with him about barnyard fowl, not just bird flu. Stick around. We'll continue our conversation with Eric Peters in just a few moments.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com is my guest. If you go to the show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com, these are show notes for May 7th, you will find a link to Eric's website. Eric, let's talk about barnyard fowl. You actually had a really good article on this just recently on your site about taking care of the chickens and protecting them. And let's talk like a couple older Gen Xers here who have somehow found purpose in life in keeping birds. What's up with that?
Well, purpose and practicality, as anybody who's gone shopping in the last year knows, the cost of a dozen eggs now is about equivalent to what we used to pay for a ribeye. And beyond that, there's the possibility of not being able to get things like eggs anymore in the future. So, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be able to provide those things for yourself. So that's part of it. But another part of it is, you've got to deal with the things the people who raise chickens and animals and so on have to deal with. And one of those things is predators, not the government kind, the wild kind, who aren't really the bad kind. After all, they're part of the food chain. They're just trying to get a meal. But, one of the things that you do if you want to get the best quality eggs is that you let your chickens free roam out in the field so that they can eat grass and bugs. Problem is, when they're out in the field, grass and bugs, there are also things like foxes out there and owls and hawks, which will come in and snatch your bird. So then you got to balance how are you going to, avoid the predation, decimation of your flock while at the same time giving the birds access to the grass and the bugs.
Yeah, and as you point out in the article, if you keep them confined, particularly chickens, if there's anything green, they will quickly, clean it right down to the ground. They'll give goats a run for their money.
Yep, and that's why a lot of people who have chickens in the backyard use these things called chicken tractors, which I know you know about, but for the sake of people listening, it's essentially a mobile run/coop that has wheels on it. And you can move it from place to place in your yard so that they don't denude the whole yard and yet have access to what they need and are denied and predators are denied access. Now, the downside, of course, is you either have to buy or build the thing, and then you have to move it, and like we were talking about off the air a little bit, when you have a full-time real job, having the job of going out there and moving chicken tractors around and all of that gets to be a bit cumbersome.
Well, and as far as, taking care of predators and stuff too, I mean, as a kid, I dreamed that one day I would live in the kind of setting where I would have a .22 sitting by the door. And that's the setting I find myself in right now. And I'm not out there, looking for any excuse to plink anything, but if a predator comes along, and we have them here too, coyotes and foxes and whatnot, I definitely stand ready to defend my girls.
Yep, me too. In fact, I went on a fox hunt the other day. And they are remarkably bright little beasties. And the thing would taunt me. It would make noise, and I would get close to wherever it was, and then it would move somewhere else very stealthily, very quietly. Remember, foxes are clever. And then it would make a noise at me as if to mock me. Hey, I'm over here now, loser. And I never was able to see the thing.
Clever. Very, very clever. Let's shift gears here for a moment. I noticed a couple other articles that I really was drawn to. One was the economics of clinging to a clunker. Boy, those are a couple of words that have kind of taken on different meaning over the last 15 years or so, right?
Yeah, I mean, isn't it really astonishing the way they gaslight and disparage things that are healthy that are sound, that are productive. So if you own an older car that is paid for, they want to characterize it as a clunker. It's just an old piece of junk. And they want to, use that to convince you that, well, you should get rid of said clunker and sign up for monthly payments forever, for years. And what fascinates me, they scare people into this because, if you're driving a clunker and you never know, you might have to pay for a repair. But on the other hand, if you sign up for a car payment, you're going to make a payment every month, and a big one for the car.
Yep. It's everything is so expensive. And actually, in the second half of today's show, I'm going to be joined by a friend of mine who he's an insurance specialist. He's also a martial artist. We call him the insurance ninja. Mm-hmm. But we're going to talk about why the cost of insurance is going up so much, and he's got some pretty solid answers. Looking forward to that.
Yep. Yeah, well, I'm sure he'll tell you part of it is because they have the government backing them, and they can make you buy what they had to sell. That's part of it. And the other part of it is these new cars in particular are so expensive to repair. You get into the most minor of accidents, something that in the past would have been, I just pull that dent, no problem. Now it's thousands of dollars, and that's being reflected in the cost of premiums.
Hear, hear. Talk to me about touchscreens. This article particularly got my attention because, man, I have a love-hate relationship with touchscreens, and I think you pretty much dialed it in.
Yeah, me too. This is this trend. It's now become ubiquitous of emulating the cell phone interface in a vehicle. If you've been in a new vehicle or a late model vehicle, you've already seen it. They have basically a big cell phone, an LCD touchscreen that's built into the dashboard, and you use this thing to operate, to control the various functions and systems of the vehicle. Well, the thing is, a car is not a cell phone. A cell phone is fundamentally a disposable device. These electronics don't age very well, and when they glitch, well, you replace the thing, you throw it away. On the other hand, a car is a very expensive thing, which makes it not a disposable thing for most of us. So now you've got this thing in the car that is going to age rapidly, both in terms of its function and, in terms of its currentness. Think about how old and antiquated, crickety, and useless a 5-year-old cell phone is. Well, imagine the cell phone in your car. New today, it looks like it's got all the latest stuff, but 5 years from now, it's going to be an obsolete piece of junk that probably can't be updated. And when it fails, probably you won't be able to get a replacement part for it. And since it controls so many of the things in the car, you won't be able to control those things anymore, which effectively renders the car a throwaway.
Yep. It's, it's quite a helpless feeling, when the power goes out to a particular component or for some reason the touch screen stops working. You're pretty much stuck. And I know people are like, well, what do you want to do? Go back to the days when you had to hand crank up the old Model T? I'm not suggesting that, but I do like the fact that...
No, I'm suggesting something sensible. The power windows that were in cars 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they worked just as well, and they worked better, actually, than the power windows in a new car. You push the button, it goes up. You push the button, it goes down. And the difference was that back in those days, it was a switch, a hot wire, and a ground wire. Very simple. Now it's all interconnected with body control modules, which are mini computers. And when they glitch, it's no longer just a matter of figuring out, well, that wire, the solder broke and the wire came off, or the switch needs to be replaced. Now it's a whole big ordeal, and you may not be able to find the correct part. And even if you do find the correct part, it might not interface with your car anymore.
Yep. Well, that old clunker, it may have manual switches and whatnot, but by gosh, I can fix those or I can work with those. And I don't mind luxury, but I like having something that will continue working long after all the doodads and gewgaws, have stopped working.
Well, me too. And I like something that operates as a kind of compensatory measure vis-a-vis inflation. We're all having to pay more because our money buys less. So a way that you can kind of counteract that is to have something that doesn't cost you money all the time. And these old clunkers don't cost you money all the time, because while you might have to spend money on a repair at some point over the next year or two, 3 or 4, you're not going to be spending $400, $500, $600 every month on the regular.
No. And I think this is probably just going to become more and more of a concern for people as time goes on. That inflation factor is, it's none of us has the discretionary income that we had even a couple of years ago. So if you're going to make adjustments, make them wise ones. And I think you have been a strong proponent of, as much self-sufficiency as you can get squared away now. You'll probably be glad you did it at some point down the road.
I think so. You and I have been on the leading edge of this, but I think it's catching up and becoming more mainstream out of necessity. Most people just want to go about their lives and, just not think about this stuff, but they're being forced to because of the cost of everything, and they're having to reevaluate what they're spending money on.
Yep. Well, Eric, great as always to visit with you. Again, I'll have a link to your website, and all I can tell you is, keep your powder dry, keep your head down.
Yeah, absolutely.
And whatever you do, don't think unapproved thoughts, because someone out there is listening and watching and wants to make sure that we're, staying within the boundaries.
And that's just why I'll speak my mind from now until the day they come to get me.
Hear, hear. All right. Again, my guest has been Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com. Eric, I look forward to our conversation next week.
Ditto, Bryan.
All right. We'll take a very quick break. When we come back, Josh Judd is going to be joining me. Yes, he is the insurance ninja. He's also a really great guy, and I know I can get some good straight answers out of him. So stick around. We'll talk to him coming up after these messages.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. All right, so I've been worrying. Yes, I've been stewing over watching the price of everything go higher, and I've got a good friend who is he's a financial ninja. In fact, we call him the insurance ninja. Josh Judd joins me by telephone. Josh, how are you today?
It's fantastic.
Okay, so I want to make sure we establish the background and the position of mild authority from which you are speaking today. Share, if you would, just a little bit of your background. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
So I've been in the insurance world for about 2 decades now. I started back in 2004 when everybody was, really going, and I made it through '08, which was the crucial time. So I've been around for a while. I've seen a lot. I've spent a lot of time reading and studying stuff, and so things really pop for me when I start seeing news trends and things like that. I really I can figure out kind of the writing on the wall from what the news is saying, and sometimes they're not saying what's really happening, but what actually is happening is in the background, and we start seeing it in our industry a lot.
Well, I know that you're an expert at what you do. I also know you care a lot about this country. You're not just a bystander who says, whatever happens. I know you're a good guy who cares about America and all the things that have made this country great. Let's talk a little bit about what is happening to our economy, and I want to get your take on this. Everything costs more. Can you tell me why that's happening?
Everything. Well, yeah, you start looking at inflation's happening, and there's a lot of things that they've taken out of the inflationary index that we don't really quote count anymore, but that are pretty important. It's food and energy they've taken out. Early in my life, they took out beef in the food category as a meat, and they put chicken in to make inflation look better. They're always trying to figure out ways to make inflation look better, and so food and energy they've taken out. But you look at CPI and everything that's going on. It's going up. It's ugly, and you can't look the average American in the face and say things aren't costing more, because they are.
Yeah, who are you going to believe? Your lying eyes or us? The people who are there to control the narrative and spin it so it's favorable to the people in power. So I have to ask, as far as insurance goes, I have been hearing people talk about, my car insurance has really gone up, and my driving record is still spotless. I'm a careful driver and everything. What is it that drives up the cost of auto insurance?
Well, there's a ton of factors, and individually there's a lot of factors that drive it up, based on your personal driving history, your tickets, your accidents. If you these are the big ones: DUIs, SR22s. SR22 is when you get caught without insurance, and the court mandates it. That gets real expensive then. You have a lot of different things. Lapses. You move to a different area that has a higher population. And here's the one that frustrates a lot of people, but this is what really insurance is. It's a pool of insureds. So the goal is to minimize our own financial loss with insurance. And that's why it was originally created years and years ago. And you have these factors that start happening. Well, if people in your community can't drive, guess what happens? They start getting in accidents, and it raises your rate because the insurance companies are paying out more money.
Ah, well, and it seems like the cost
So
of
those are
even simple repairs. For instance, you get into a very minor fender bender. Somebody backs into your car and breaks a tail light or something like that. That used to be pretty simple to fix. Anymore, though, that's expensive. Windshields are so expensive, for instance.
100%. Well, and you look at, okay, I'm gonna take you back through a journey, Brian. You had a Mustang years ago, and I liked it. It was a real pretty Mustang.
Yes.
When you had that Mustang, to replace that Mustang windshield, it's pretty simple. You pull it out, right? If you had to replace a tail light, it's pretty easy. It might be a $50 light. You plug it in. The technology that is involved with cars today, you pull a windshield out, it's attached to your dash. There's so many different, well, it depends on the vehicle, but the newer vehicles have like rain sensors and all of these different sensors to detect things. So it's not just a simple windshield anymore. Sometimes these things are $2,000 or more to replace a windshield.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's, And a lot of these features that the cars have these days aren't necessarily things the consumers were asking for. I mean, they're sold as bells and whistles, but my previous guest in the earlier segments, Eric Peters, talks about this all the time. There's a safety factor that is forced upon us. Well, we have lane assist, we have this and that, and it's designed to basically give you something you didn't ask for, but here it is anyway, to keep you safe. Does that sound familiar?
Part of it you didn't ask for, yes, and to keep you safe, yes. But if you look at our general populace is, if you look at the insurance numbers, the way I do, people can't drive anymore. The level of people being able to stay in their lanes, like I see it every day going up. I live in St. George, Utah, and when I go up Bluff Street, I see people weaving in their lanes every day when they're screwing around with their cell phones or, playing with the radio or whatever it may be. They're weaving in their lanes. They're not paying attention. And that, unfortunately, necessity is that mother of invention. We need lane assist so people's car shakes when they start riding on the white line or whatever.
Wow.
So
I don't know what it says about,
and there's,
I don't know what it says about me. I guess it says all my cars that I drive are too old for that technology, but I kind of like it that way because, just to hear me out on this, it keeps my head in the game. If I know that I don't have some automated system to check and see, are my eyes on the road and am I, maintaining a safe following distance and so forth, that means it's on me. And I like that because I want to be, intent on what I'm doing behind the wheel.
Well, and your personal accountability is huge, and you take a lot of personal responsibility in your life and all aspects of your life, not just in your driving. And so that's huge. But there are times, and you've done this before, Brian, when you're driving home from work and all of a sudden you're home and I don't remember any stoplights. I don't remember anything. You get an autopilot and your senses are tuned to the point where you stop at a red light just because it's there, not because you think about it anymore. So sometimes you'll space out and you might be having a bad day and space out in a bad way and switch through the lanes, and it's not a good thing. So the technology is overall is good, but I totally get what you're saying where government mandates come out and say, hey, we need all this extra stuff. Sometimes you just don't want it in your car.
So talk to me about when it comes to, is it possible for people to keep their insurance costs down, or what are some of the strategies they can use? I understand it's more expensive for the insurance companies to stay in business,
right?
When there are claims, those claims are going to cost more. What can drivers do, for instance, to minimize those costs? What makes them more attractive as a customer for the insurance company?
So I'm just going to be blunt with you, Brian. I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. So everybody has an insurance score. It comes down to your credit history. It comes down to your driving record. It comes to how long you've been with an insurance company. There's a lot of factors in an insurance score. If you have a terrible insurance score, it might be because you speed too much, or you might have a terrible credit score. You might not keep your policies in force very well, and you're always getting to pre-lapse. Insurance companies don't like that because you're potentially a higher risk. And so they drive up your prices. So you can increase your credit score. Make sure the biggest thing, and I'm seeing a lot lately, is people aren't paying attention to their insurance bills. Make sure your bills get paid on time. Those are really, really crucial in insurance companies. If you're over 55, go to a defensive driving course. A lot of companies will give you a pretty substantial discount on that. You can increase your deductible a little bit. And here's the one that's driven me crazy, Brian, for years. Don't claim the small stuff. Everybody wants a free windshield out of their insurance company. Well,
right.
Guess what happens with that free windshield? You get that free windshield, and then they raise your insurance premium the next renewal time. It's going to show up in your price. It will. I promise you it will.
So you're reaffirming
those little tiny claims that you get. Go ahead.
There's no such thing as a free lunch.
No. And yeah, we're paying for insurance, but the less you have claims, the more attractive you are to an insurance company. So if you're always claiming little tiny stuff, your price is going to be astronomical in a couple of years. Like there's some companies that won't ding you for towing. I had a client that I was trying to get a policy for a few years ago, and they had 17 towing claims in a year.
Ooh.
And most of the insurance companies won't even touch them because like, look, you're at risk.
Now, would AAA be one way to offset that kind of risk for your insurance company?
Absolutely. You can get your own AAA policy. Those are great products. AAA does a great job. Anything like that. But the other side of it is keep your vehicles in good shape, so you're not having to file those. Yeah, and I know stuff does happen, but it's like if you're having a constant problem with a vehicle like that over and over, it might be time to sell and get a new one.
Okay, hold that thought. We are talking with Josh Judd. He is the insurance ninja. We're going to talk about financial peace of mind, just the other side of these messages. Stay with us.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. I have my friend Josh Judd on the phone. He is the insurance ninja. And if you live in southern Utah, this is an unashamed plug. You should really talk to him. No, seriously. Now, Josh, you also do financial planning, and that's kind of something I'd like to talk with you about. We're all feeling the pinch. Everything is more expensive. Most people's discretionary income has dropped way off. Let's talk about the situation. And first of all, I'd like to get your assessment. I know you actually take a little more optimistic view than I think a lot of the people out there that I hear, the commentators. Oh, it's terrible. This is frightening. It's shades of 1929, shades of 2007. You have a much more optimistic take. Why is that?
Well, let me do one disclosure, Brian. So I'm not a financial planner, but I've spent a lot of time reading stuff that gives me some good opinions on the subject. So I don't have that license, just so we're understanding where I'm coming from. But when here's the thing, when it comes to bad economies and, people start talking about, the Great Depression and, things like that. Are we gearing up for number two? Here's one of the things that brings me a lot of comfort. You're a Christian, Brian. There's a phrase in the Bible that happens over and over and over. It came to pass. And I'm going to take this completely out of context, but Les Brown used to say this. He's a motivational speaker. Fantastic guy. You should go look him up. But he used to say this all the time. When you're down in the dumps and you're having a hard day, it has not come to stay. It has come to pass. You're going to have hard times. Everybody's going to have hard times. This country is in a position of having a hard time because of the economic principles that we've been deploying over the last 20 years. And more specifically, over the last 10, 15, we've done some really crazy things economically that's really hurt us financially, hurt us as the people. But, Brian, it's not here forever. There's going to be times when it's going to turn around.
No, it's a season, right? And seasons come and seasons go. Right. So if this is a difficult season, yes, it's difficult, but that doesn't mean it's forever.
100%. So you're going to have times of struggle. Get through them. Don't stay in them forever. Figure out ways. There's a book I read, and I love this book. It's called 5 Lessons a Millionaire Taught Me, and I love it because he talks about one thing that's huge. It's called winning in the margins. And basically what it is, it's finding little extra opportunities to either make income or make investments where you normally wouldn't see those opportunities.
So I think you and I, before we went on the air, we were talking about out of the deepest, darkest financial times in American history, more millionaires are created every time there's a huge correction. And I may be misstating that. Why does that happen? What is it that causes some people to excel, at times when others are standing there wringing their hands trying to decide, do I jump off the ledge or not?
Well, it comes down to opportunity, Brian. Let's take real estate, for example. This is a perfect example. I love real estate. It's long-term, can be a great investment, but depending on when you buy it is pretty crucial. If you are a real estate investor and the market is higher than it's ever been, it's a lousy time to buy unless you can find something that's a niche that's going to make you a ton of money. When the market starts crashing in the real estate world, guess what you do? You buy. Same thing if you go to the stock market or whatever else. If something's crashing, I call it the lemming principle. Whatever the lemmings are doing, what everybody else is doing, you should probably do the opposite.
Now that sounds like good advice. So
typically when people start talking, oh, I made all this money on this stock or this real estate purchase or whatever, the money that was made in that transaction has already been made.
So if you go rushing to it, you're basically going to be begging for crumbs. The main course is over.
Yeah, you don't ever chase what people have done in the past. 6 months ago I did this and I made all this money from it. Well, that opportunity may not be there anymore. It could be a totally different situation.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that people can basically position themselves, if nothing else, just to weather, a tough season, but maybe even to position themselves to prosper, coming out the other side of it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things you can do. Sometimes you got to work a little bit more, and that's honestly, you're not going to get there, Brian, without putting in extra effort. It doesn't matter what business you're in. It doesn't matter what career you're working in. If you're not going to put in extra effort, like if you're working at a job, you're not just going to get a raise because you're handsome. It just doesn't happen that way unless you're, in the movie industry. You know what I mean? Or a model or whatever. I certainly have never gotten a raise based on my looks, and maybe that's probably because I'm not that great of a looking guy. But you get these income bumps by doing something different. So I had a discussion with my 17-year-old son. He works at a local pizza joint, and he's making a certain dollar amount every hour. And I'm always trying to teach my kids how to win in different ways. And I said, Caleb, how do you make this extra money? He says, well, I have to do this and this and this. And I said, okay, so now you need to put yourself in this position. But if you don't know at your job how you can get a raise, one of the things that's crucial, say you're my boss, Brian, and say I've been working with you for 5 years and I haven't gotten a raise in the last year or so. I come and sit down with you in your office and I say, Brian, I'm really wanting to increase the value to the company. And I was wondering, what are some ways that I can increase the value to the company in a way that I can qualify to earn some extra money? How could I do that?
Wow. That sure sounds a lot better than, you don't pay me enough.
Well, one comes from a sense of entitlement. The other comes from a sense of duty of, hey, listen, I'm working here. I'm not just going to be working, but I know, Brian, you need something. I don't know what that is, but when I find out how to provide that extra value, you'll pay me in accordance. The reason that CEOs make so much money, Brian, is because they figured out what makes the most money to the company, and they're paid in accordance with their value to that company.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And I am so grateful for parents who teach their kids, that work ethic of there's no such thing as they don't pay me enough to do this job. Because I've tried to teach my kids, if you show up early and you stay late and you do more than what you're being asked to do, in other words, and the work that you do is your best effort. You really sincerely put a bow on top of it every time you're swabbing the bathroom floor or emptying the trash or whatever it is you're doing. If you will do that, you will not stay in those entry-level positions for very long because that kind of initiative 100%. Is recognized.
100%. And doing each job well is important, but it's also important to find out what jobs are valued the most by your company. I'm terrible, Bryan, at paperwork. I hate it. My wife is so good at it. If she did my paperwork and I never had to look back again, that would be the best thing ever for me. I don't do well at paperwork, but here's what I do well at. I do well at relationships. I love my clients. And that's the part of the business that I'm really good at. And years ago, I heard a quote. There's a guy named Tom Hopkins. He used to do sales training, and he was an international sales trainer, a really, really good guy. But he said something that stuck in my mind forever. And he said, follow up, follow up, follow up until they buy or die. And I'm persistent. I'm not annoying with my persistence, but I'm going to follow up until you either tell me not to or you die.
Is that a threat? I'm kidding. I'm just teasing.
No, not even a little bit. I do sell life insurance though, so.
Josh, we're up against the clock here, so I want to give my listeners an opportunity to get to meet you in terms of is there a website that you can direct them to? Is there social media where they can follow you? I say this because I follow him on Facebook, and I love the inspirational stuff that he's sharing on Facebook. Where everybody else complains, Josh is giving me a lifeline.
Yeah. So I'm on Facebook. You can find me at Josh Judd, Joshua Judd at Facebook. I also have Financial Freedom Alliance on Facebook. I have a website. It's kind of jinky. You're welcome to come swing by my office. We're right behind Meters on Bluff Street. It's 225 North Bluff Street, and we're suite number 8. But I'm happy to field any phone calls. People have questions about what we talked about today or anything else. So,
and what was your website again?
It's FFAINS.com. So Frank Apple, INS like insurance.com. It's Financial Freedom Alliance Insurance is basically what that stands for.
All right. So my listeners in the southern Utah area, pay attention. You have no idea what a resource you have right there in your backyard in the form of Josh Judd. And he's also a really amazing martial artist too. So if you want to improve yourself and take responsibility for your own well-being, I bet you could probably help some people out in that respect.
Yeah, I help a couple of schools out here and there. I'll go help them teach and stuff. I don't have an active school anymore, but I love teaching still, so I go out and help a couple of times a month or so and go help people just for free. It's just for fun at this point.
Josh, I sure appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Absolutely.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.